The origin of word yoga can be traced back to the Vedas and Upanishads. Vedas are a large body of spiritual literature in ancient India composed in Sanskrit language. It's believed to be the revelations of great sages dating back to 1700 to 1100 before Common Era. And Upanishads are part of Vedas. Veda simply means knowledge or wisdom. The root of yoga lies covered up in the fogs of ancient times. It was gradually advanced and created by the antiquated sages in ancient Indus Valley as well as everywhere throughout the world. It has, be that as it may, been adjusted to suit local dialects, social thoughts, and other social impacts. The embodiment of yoga was enveloped with or clarified in various images, analogies, and dialects. A few customs trust that yoga was an awesome blessing uncovered to the old sages with the goal that mankind could have the chance to understand its divine nature. By and large, the knowledge of yoga was passed on from educator or master to their followers by oral conversations. Thusly, there was a reasonable comprehension of the significance of the systems and points of yoga as a master through his own involvement guided the understudies along the correct way and far from any perplexity and misconception. It was just when the different frameworks of yoga were recorded that individuals started to see logical inconsistencies in the lessons. These disparities were just shallow, nonetheless, and immersed through error. The writers of the traditional writings can't be accused for they recorded their thoughts on yoga as plainly as conceivable so as to evade error. They clarified their thoughts with the base measure of words so individuals would not lose themselves by attempting to intellectualize about word implications, or in different cases they dressed their works in imagery and analogies. This was done as such that an individual arranged and prepared for an educating would almost certainly comprehend the imagery, if vital with the assistance of a master. Despite the fact that precautionary measures were taken, numerous mistaken assumptions emerged for the most part among excessively verbose and scholarly researchers who did not have the individual experience to help their critiques. Sadly, individuals have tuned into the observers without turning to the first messages and exhortation of individuals more in contact with the soul of yoga. The outcome has been disarray, and as a result some expectation of individuals have played out the most peculiar act of sake of yoga. Some frequently cited precedents are strolling ablaze, sitting in the late morning sun and tormenting the body in an assortment of ways, for example, remaining on one leg in one spot for a considerable length of time. As far as the ancient texts are concerned, it would be rather difficult to find an exact date because historians generally differ. However, the teachings may date back even earlier than their compilations into text. In India, it's believed that the practice of yoga originated at the dawn of civilization. In the yogic lore, Shiva is seen as the first yogi or Adiyogi and the first guru or Adiguru. A number of seal statues discovered from the time of Indus Valley civilization depicts the positions of yoga. Therefore, it could also be possible that yoga was practiced in ancient India even before 5000 years or the pre-Vedic era. Some scholars have found evidence of early yogic practice in the archaeological artifacts from Indus Valley civilization, which developed from about 2500 before Common Era. Sir John Marshall, Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, began excavating two sites, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, in 1921 and discovered the remains of a highly developed urban culture. Among the artifacts unearthed was the Pashupati seal, so called because Marshall believed that the horned figure surrounded by animals which it depicts was a prototype of Shiva, the lord of the beast, called Pashupati, seated in a yogic posture. Textual evidence of yoga practice begins to emerge only at a much later stage. The first occurrence of the word yoga itself is in the Katha Upanishad, which is approximately 3rd century before Common Era, where it is revealed to the boy Nachiketas by Yama, the god of death, as a means to leave behind joy and sorrow and overcome death itself. Then the next is the Shweta Svatara Upanishad, approximately 3rd century before Common Era, outlines a procedure in which the body is maintained in an upright posture while the mind is brought under control by the restraint of breath. The much later Maitri Upanishad describes a 6-fold yoga method, namely pranayama, which is breath control, pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, dhyana, contemplation, dharana, placing of the concentrated mind, tarka, philosophical inquiry, samadhi, absorption. These technical terms will later, with the exception of tarka, be used to designate 5 of the 8 limbs of Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga. The section of the Mahabharata known as the Bhagavad Gita lays out 3 parts of yoga by which the aspirant can know the Lord or Supreme Person, here known as Krishna. The first is the path of action, Karma Yoga, in which one gives up the fruits of one's action but continues to be an agent in the world, guided by Krishna himself. The second is the path of devotion, Bhakti Yoga, in which one's devotion to Krishna swiftly liberates one from worldly suffering regardless of caste. And the third is the path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga, which liberates through discrimination of the true nature of self and universe. The Bhagavad Gita also describes a range of practices undertaken by yogins of the day, such as internalization of the Vedic ritual, as in the sacrifice of inhalation, prana, into the exhalation, apana, as well as the instructions for preparation of a yogic sadhana and for the withdrawal of the senses. The Yoga Sutras, somewhere around 250 Common Era, ascribed to Patanjali, consist of 195 brief sutras outlining diverse methods for the attainment of yoga. It is heavily influenced by Sankhya philosophy but also contains distinct elements from Buddhism and a variety of shramana. Shramana was an ascetic tradition in those days. The Yoga Sutra Abhyasa, attributed to sage Vyasa around 500 to 600 Common Era, is the first and the most influential commentary on the text and is sometimes even regarded as a supplementary part of the Yoga Sutra itself. Although the text has received an enormous amount of interest from modern scholars, even coming to be known as the Classical Yoga, bear in mind that it is one among many texts on yoga and may not necessarily be the authoritative source for Indian yogic traditions, as is commonly supposed. It has become the primary text for Anglophone yoga practitioners in the 20th century, largely due to the influence of the European scholarship on the one hand and early promoters of practical yoga like Swami Vivekananda on the other. However, it is common for modern yoga teachers confine their discussions of the text of Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga to 8-limbed yoga. The history of yoga is generally divided into 4 broad periods. First is the Vedic age, the second is pre-classical yoga period, the second is classical yoga period, and the fourth is post-classical yoga period. The Vedic period is from 3000 before Common Era to 800 before Common Era. In the Vedic period, the Vedas contain the oldest known yogic teachings, but indirectly without elaborating much on the term yoga, which is also called Vedic yoga. In this period, people followed the rishis, and life was lived in divine harmony. These rishis realized the ultimate truth through their intense spiritual and meditative practices, which is called as Shruti, deep dhyana to samadhi. This period marked the emergence of the Vedas. The literature during this period is called the Vedas that set the tone for Hinduism of today. The Vedas were a compilation of worship songs that recognize an almighty power and encompass the most ancient teachings of Vedic people. The lessons taught from the Vedas are recognized after some centuries as Vedic Yoga. In Vedic period, customs and functions that allow the mind to broaden are the most important aspect of all the teachings. The Vedic people welcomed rishis to instruct them on how to live, to meet the desired standards of divinity and togetherness that the Vedas set forth. Rishis also had the power to view the paramount actuality by means of spiritual customs. Rishis felt that they could best express themselves by living in a quiet, secluded place but close to nature, so that they established their domiciles in forest. Upanishads, or the end part of Vedas, sometimes also called as Vedanta, are central philosophical concepts of early Vedic period. Upanishads have also influenced the teachings of Buddhism and Jainism. In the Vedanta philosophy, the Yoga Upanishads deals with the theory and the practice of yoga. The emphasis is on the methodology and dhyana. References to yoga and techniques of yoga are found in several Upanishads, some Shaiva and some Vaishnava Upanishads, which are exclusively devoted to the theory and practice of yoga, are known as Yoga Upanishads. However, since they are later day works, compiled probably from pre-existing works, from a historical perspective, they are not much value, except for comparative study and technical details. Among the earliest Upanishads references to yoga are found in the Katha, Svetasvatara and Maitri Upanishads. In them, we can discern a gradual unfolding of the techniques and practices of yoga. Pre-classical yoga period, 800 before Common Era to 250 before Common Era. In the pre-classical yogic period, the Upanishads expound the teachings of Vedas, and we see the transformation of Vedas in the Upanishads, and the idea of ritual sacrifice from the earlier part of the Vedas was transformed into the idea of sacrifice of ego through self-knowledge, action, Karma Yoga, and wisdom, Jnana Yoga, emerged. During this time, certain aspects of yoga were incorporated into Buddhism and Jainism, and especially dhyana. The Upanishads are also called as Vedanta because they form the end part of the Vedas, and also because they are said to contain the end or aim or essence of yoga. These expound upon three subjects: Jiva, embodied soul; Jagat, the world; and Ishvara, the creator of the universe. Ishvara has a wide range of meanings according to the Indian spiritual systems. It could be supreme soul, supreme consciousness, ruler, husband, lord, personal god, supreme being, divinity, god, special self, king or queen. It all depends in what context the term is being used. The climax of the inquiry is the experience of the essential identity of the individual soul, Atman, inside, with ultimate reality, Brahman, outside. The principles of yoga started to gain influence over most of the Eastern philosophies, most notably Buddhism, Jainism, and modern-day Hinduism. Buddhism began in the 6th century before Common Era, when Buddha began his teachings, which include engaging in specific techniques of dhyana, contemplation or deep concentration. Around approximately 500 before Common Era, the oldest discovered sacred scripture was composed and named Bhagavad Gita, which translates to Lord's Song. Bhagavad Gita spoke of yoga and revealed that it had in fact been around for quite some time before the scripture was written, yet does not give a date that indicates when yoga began. The main focus of the Gita is to emphasize that living, functioning, and accomplishing things, but to stray from hardships, people must put their egos aside and let their actions speak for who they are. Similar to how the Upanishads gave more insight to the teachings of the Vedas, the Gita integrated the teachings of the Upanishads. Found in the Gita are 3 aspects that allow one to lead the greatest life. These principles are karma, generous actions, bhakti, caring dedication, and jnana, knowledge. The Gita attempted to bring together these 3 ideals that formed separate yogas, which were karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and jnana yoga, which made the practice more important. The Gita was a communication even between God-man Krishna and Prince Arjuna that was about goodness and the opposition of anything evil.